What's growing on gardeners? It's the end of January here in Central California, and I know it's hard to believe because we're still technically in winter. Still, February just may be the most exciting month in all of California gardening. Why? Right now is when we start most of our seeds for our spring and summer gardens, and in today's video, I'm going to share 32 different veggies you can start from seed or transplant right now. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications. Now I live here in the Central Valley, Zone 9B, but despite February being the shortest month of the year, there's a lot of variability across California. Things that you start from seed at the beginning of February in San Diego are going to mature at a very different time than if you start them in late February up in Sacramento or the Bay Area. So I will do my best to break it down. Whether you live in the coastal regions, the inland valleys, or the cooler northern parts of the state. For most of you California gardeners, February is probably going to be the month when you're going to want to start these various seeds. Segment 1. Nightshades. We're going to begin this video by pulling out the big guns. Veggies 1 through 5 are your nightshades grown from transplants, so those are your tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, tomatillos, and ground cherries. As I mentioned, most people living in California are going to start their nightshade transplants sometime in February. However, there's a good amount of variability there, and that is because most nightshades grown from transplant take about 8 weeks from the day you sow that seed to the point that the transplants get mature enough for you to transplant out into your garden. So for somebody in Zone 9B, like me here in the Central Valley, and for those of you down in Southern California in Zones 9 and 10, places like San Diego, Orange County, the Inland Empire, you're probably going to want to start your nightshades from transplant at the very beginning of February. That way, they will be ready for transplant out in your garden, probably at the end of March or early April. For people up in Northern California, the cooler coastal regions, or the mountains, we're talking zones 7 and 8, places like Sacramento, the Bay Area, or up near Redding. You're probably going to want to start your seeds at the very tail end of February. That way, they will be ready for transplant at the very end of April, when your last frost date has passed. Now these transplants I have right here are experimental tomatoes, and this is what you can expect them to look like about 1 month after you sow that seed. So these can be up-potted into a 3-inch container, and you can keep them for another month. I will show you what that will look like. Now what you see right here is a tomato transplant that is about 2 months old. It's in a 4-inch by 4-inch pot. It's a lot more substantial. This would probably be too large for the tomato transplant you're looking for. In fact, it's already starting to flower. You generally don't want to see your tomato transplants flowering before transplanting them into the garden. That means that they're root-bound and stressed. That being said, this is more just an example. I'm planting these way too early just to have as props for making videos like these to help inform you. The other nightshades, like your peppers, eggplant, tomatillos, and ground cherries, they're pretty much going to follow the same transplanting schedule as your tomatoes. For the most part, they're all going to mature about 8 weeks after you plant the seed. However, it's not a big deal to get them out a little bit earlier than that. It is a bigger deal to push them beyond a certain size, where they tend to get root-bound. They won't appreciate being transplanted if they're more than, say, 8 weeks old after germination. So please keep that in mind when timing your individual transplants. Now here's a California-specific tip. If you're in the coastal regions like San Francisco, Santa Cruz, or along the Central Coast, you actually have a much longer window because your summers stay so cool. You can start tomatoes and peppers all the way into March and still get a great harvest because you won't see the 100-degree days we get here in the valley. So you coastal folks have a lot more flexibility with your timing. Segment 2. Root vegetables. Veggies 6 through 10 that you should plant in February are going to be your direct sown, frost-tolerant root vegetables, and those are going to be beets, radishes, carrots, parsnips, and turnips. Now, all of these plants, because they're root vegetables, do not like being transplanted. Therefore, you'll plant the seed directly in the ground. Most people in California are going to plant these directly at some point in February, but your location will dictate how early in February that is. Now, one thing you have to factor in with these seeds is that they'll take about 10 to 14 days to germinate. So whatever the weather is at the time, by the time they break through the ground, you have to think of what the weather is going to be, basically 2 weeks further down the road. So here in the Central Valley, our hard frosts and freezes generally stop by mid-March. So, if I were to plant my seeds directly in the ground on February 15th, by the time they germinate, it's probably going to be pretty close to the very end of February or the beginning of March. And that's perfect timing because we're past the worst of the cold. For those of you in Southern California, places like Los Angeles, San Diego, Riverside, you can honestly plant these things right now at the beginning of February because you rarely see hard freezes. Your biggest concern is actually going to be getting them harvested before it gets too hot in late May and June. For you folks up in the mountains or far northern California, places like Tahoe, Shasta, or even parts of the Sierra foothills, you may need to wait until late February or even early March because the ground might still be frozen or too cold for germination. Now here's a common mistake I see California gardeners make. They plant these root vegetables too late, thinking they have all spring. But here's the thing. Carrots, beets, and radishes do not handle our California heat very well. Once we start seeing those 80 and 90-degree days in late spring, these crops become tough, woody, and bitter. So it's generally advisable that you plant these in such a way that you harvest them all before it gets too hot, probably by early to mid-May here in the valley, maybe late May on the coast. I learned this lesson the hard way. My first year gardening in California, I planted carrots in March, thinking I had plenty of time. By the time they were ready in June, it was already hitting 95 degrees regularly, and those carrots were so woody and bitter, they were basically inedible. Don't make the same mistake I did. Plant them now while it's still cool. Segment 3. Brassicas veggies. Numbers 11 through 17 are brassicas grown from transplants and include cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, chard, collard greens, and mustard greens. Now, timing is everything with these veggies, so if you haven't started them yet, you may need to really get a move on, depending on where you live in California. That's because the Brassica family of vegetables is very sensitive to heat. Temperatures above, say, 75 degrees can really make them tough, woody, and bolt in short order. So they actually grow best when daytime highs are in the 50-60 degree range. Now, brassicas are all frost and freezing tolerant. However, some of them are more cold tolerant than others. Generally speaking, it's going to be safe to plant brassicas out into your garden as long as you're not going to see any temperatures below, say, 22 degrees Fahrenheit or so, and it will benefit you to cover them with some kind of frost blanket or some kind of cloth if you think it's going to drop below 28 degrees. So that's really the decision that you have to make when you're timing these things out. Now, here in the Central Valley, I generally find I need to harvest my brassicas by about May 1st. So, for that reason, I've already started my second wave of brassicas, which you see right here. This is mostly broccoli, cabbage, and mustard greens. So it's generally better to be a little bit early with brassicas and fight the cold than it is to be a little late and fight the heat. Now, the overwhelming majority of California is a little bit behind me in terms of timing, so for that reason, it will be just fine for you to start your brassica transplants indoors right now. They'll be ready to plant out into your garden about 6 weeks after you sow the seed. These brassicas you see here germinated about a month ago, and they are pretty much ready to go. Still, we have a cold wave coming over the next 2 weeks here in the valley, so I'm going to delay and let them hit the maximum 6 weeks of maturity before I plant them out. Now, for you folks in Southern California, San Diego, Palm Springs, the Coachella Valley, if you haven't started your brassicas yet, you really need to get a move on. It's going to start getting warm very quickly in your region. If you do decide to start things this late, make sure you have 40% shade cloth on hand to finish your brassicas under so they do not flower and go to seed on you before they are mature. Here's a California-specific challenge. Our coastal regions have this amazing advantage with brassicas. If you're in San Francisco, Half Moon Bay, Santa Barbara, or anywhere along the Central Coast, you can actually grow brassicas almost year-round because it stays so cool. You coastal folks are living in brassica paradise, so take advantage of it. For those of us inland, we're fighting a race against time. The Central Valley goes from 50 degrees in February to 90 degrees by May. That's a 40-degree swing in just 12 weeks. So we have to time these perfectly. I plant my brassica transplants out in early March, and I'm harvesting by late April before that first hot wave hits. If you wait too long, you'll end up with bolted broccoli and bitter kale. Segment 4. Celery, the challenge crop veggie number 18, is for the California gardener who's really looking for a challenge. Celery. I have tried growing celery 3 times here in California, and I have failed twice. I'm hoping the third time is the charm. Now, since I haven't been completely successful growing celery, I can't tell you exactly what to do, but I can tell you what not to do. First off, the biggest tip I can give you is that celery seeds have a long germination time. You'll need to start them 21 days before germination indoors. That's right, they take 3 weeks to germinate indoors. Then you're going to need about another 6 to 8 weeks to turn them into sizable transplants. So it's probably going to take something like 3 months of preparation to really get the celery going. Second, celery is a cool weather season crop. However, it is not extremely cold hardy. So the real challenge here in California is that these need to mature when it's still fairly cool out. But they can't take those hard freezes. I transplanted celery out into my garden last fall, and they did fine with the light frost and freezes. But once we hit 26 and 27 degrees Fahrenheit, those 2 back-to-back nights here in the valley, it killed off all of my celery transplants. So they just can't take those hard freezes. Now here in California, we have another problem. It gets hot fast. By late May, we're already seeing 90-degree days, and celery just shuts down in that kind of heat. So you have this incredibly narrow window. Not too cold, not too hot. It's like Goldilocks, and celery is the pickiest vegetable I've ever tried to grow. Here are the tips I'm going to give you for growing celery in California. Make sure you give ample time for germination and get those transplants as large as possible before you put them out in your garden. Then transplant them after the hard freezes are over, so probably early March for us here in the valley, late February for Southern California, and mid-March for Northern California. But while it is still lightly frosting, If you're expecting a light frost, cover them so they're not exposed. This will give you the maximum cool season for them to grow in your garden. Then chances are, in most of California, it's going to get too hot for the celery too quickly. Get yourself some 40% shade cloth and drape it over the celery plants so they can finish in an artificially shady, cool environment. That's the only thing I can tell you. I'm also growing this variety called Tango that I got from Territorial Seeds. It's supposed to be one of the better varieties for warmer climates, but it's still giving me one heck of a challenge. So start with this maybe, or look for other good varieties that handle some heat, and then it's going to be a lot of timing and trial and error. But once I nail this, I think it's really going to be worth it because store-bought celery and homegrown celery are not even in the same universe when it comes to flavor. Segment 5. Frost-Tolerant Direct Sown. Veggies numbers 19 through 22 are your frost-tolerant direct sown crops, and those are going to be peas, including English peas, snap peas, and snow peas. Your direct sown leaf lettuces, like you see right here, and also broccoli rabe, also known as rapini, and arugula, also known as rocket. Now, all of these things, generally speaking, tolerate frost and freezes, but they like being direct sown out into the garden. They don't like being transplanted. So, for example, these red leaf lettuces, as you see right here, are grown closely together in tightly knit rows. They don't do well as transplants because they grow more as row crops than as heading crops. Peas are frost tolerant, but they can't withstand hard freezes. Timing is everything when it comes to growing peas here in California. These are leftover peas that I planted in the fall, but I mistimed them by about 3 weeks. I planted them too late. They didn't start flowering until it started getting too cold here, and as a result, you can see how burnt up these plants are. And for that reason, I'm probably just not going to get any kind of harvest off of them. Now, it's difficult growing fall peas here in California because you have to plant them when it's still pretty hot. We're talking September, when it's still 90 degrees, and hope that you get a long enough fall before the hard freezes set in to get a harvest. It's much easier to plant them in late winter or early spring, then harvest them in mid to late spring. So generally speaking, I plant my peas at the end of February here in the Central Valley, so they germinate in March when the frost and freezes for the most part stop, and then I can get a really good harvest out of them in May before it gets too hot. That is generally what I recommend people do. I think these make a fantastic overall spring crop for California. Now, for those of you in Southern California, you can plant peas right now at the beginning of February. You rarely see hard freezes, so you'll be harvesting in April. For you folks on the coast, you have the longest window. You can plant peas from now all the way through March and still get a harvest because your summers stay so cool. Now, arugula and broccoli rabe, on the other hand, germinate and grow very quickly, and they are very sensitive to heat. And when I say heat, I mean temperatures of 70 degrees can stress them out and cause them to bolt. So these are exclusively cool season vegetables. Now, both of them are best sown directly in rows, and they like growing very closely together. So I sowed these a couple of weeks ago, and they are already up because it gets so warm so quickly here in California, especially in the Central Valley, where we can go from 50 degrees in February to 80 degrees in April. I need to harvest all of these things by mid-April, or it just gets too hot. So I want to be able to actually start harvesting my arugula and broccoli rabe in late February and throughout March. That's the only way I'm going to get a good harvest on these very heat-sensitive plants. So plan accordingly based on when your weather starts heating up. Segment 6. Annual herbs, veggies, 23 through 26, are your annual transplantable herbs. Basil, parsley, cilantro, also known as coriander, and dill. Now cilantro, parsley, and dill are all tolerant of cold, but they don't do very well in heat. Cilantro is by far the most heat-sensitive, and I actually like to direct sow these. They germinate very well in cool soil and really love cold temperatures. We're talking 20 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't really bother cilantro. They will recover even if they get a little bit burned. So you have the flexibility to grow cilantro either as transplants or direct sown. The only thing you need to know is you need to get it in when it's still cold, because once it starts getting into the 70s, it's going to bolt on you. Now here in California, cilantro is a staple. We use it in everything from tacos to salsa to pho. So I grow it in succession. I plant a new row every 3 weeks from February through March, and that gives me continuous harvests from March through May. Once we hit those 80-degree days in late May, cilantro is done. It bolts faster than anything I've ever grown. Dill is not quite as cold-hardy. I've had good luck growing dill all the way down to around the 22 to 25-degree range, depending on the duration of the freeze. This dill I actually sowed from seed, but it will grow better from transplants. Then transplant it into your garden once the hard freezes stop in late winter, early spring. This is going to get pretty banged up over the next few days as we get a cold snap here in the valley. Now parsley, on the other hand, is very cold-hardy. These are some parsley seeds I sowed directly. They germinated, but they are really struggling. I strongly recommend you grow parsley indoors from transplant. Parsley is fairly sensitive to heat, but it can grow all summer long here in California if you put it under 30 to 40% shade cloth or move it into the shade. I keep my parsley in a pot on the north side of my house during summer, and it produces all season long. Basil, on the other hand, is extremely sensitive to frost. Even the lightest frost will kill basil completely, but basil germinates in about the same time and takes about the same time to grow as a transplant as a tomato or a pepper plant does. So for that reason, I always start my new basil plants for the next season at the same time that I start my tomatoes. They also love the same temperatures. Basil can really take a lot of heat in the California summer. I mean, we're talking 100, 105 degrees. Basil loves it. And while it can't take a frost or a freeze, it doesn't mind temperatures in the upper 30s or 40 degrees for a very brief period of time, as long as it comes back up during the day, just like a tomato or a pepper plant can briefly tolerate. So I like to group all of those things, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and basil, and interplant them in my garden once the frost and freezes stop in the spring, which here in the Central Valley is usually early to mid-March. Segment 7. Alliums veggies. 27 through 31 are your alliums, including onions, bunching onions, garlic, shallots, and leeks. Now, while these are all very cold-hardy vegetables, they don't necessarily grow the same. So, depending on where you live in California and what you want to grow, you may be running out of time if you want them to be successful. Now, for example, you can grow leeks and bunching onions year-round. I grow them throughout the summer and winter. They're very cold-hardy, they're very heat-tolerant, and the reason why you can grow them throughout the year is that your leeks and your bunching onions, we're eating them for the greenery. We eat the green tops of the bunching onions as spring onions, and we eat the white central part of the leek, which is between the roots and the green tops. You eat the middle of the stem. So for that reason, it doesn't really matter what time of year you grow your green onions or your leeks, because you're just eating the vegetation of the plant. Onions, shallots, and garlic, on the other hand, have to be planted at very specific times of the year. That's because we harvest them for the bulbs, not the greens. And the bulbs grow in response to the length of the day during spring and summer. The longer the days when they mature, the better bulbing you're going to get. So for that reason, I have to start my onion and shallot transplants that you see right here very early because they are sensitive to day length. Now here in California, this is actually a really important distinction. California is divided over onions. We have short day, intermediate day, and long day varieties, and which one you grow depends on where you live in the state. For those of us in Southern California, San Diego, Los Angeles, the Inland Empire, you need short-day onion varieties. These start bulbing when days are 10 to 12 hours long. Varieties like Red Creole, Texas Early White, and California Early Red work great down there. For those of us in the Central Valley and Central Coast, so that's me here in Fresno, as well as folks in Bakersfield, Modesto, and the Bay Area, you want intermediate day varieties. These start bulbing when days are 12 to 14 hours long. Varieties like Candy, Red Candy Apple, and Superstar work perfectly for us. For those of you in Northern California, Sacramento, Redding, anywhere near the Oregon border, you actually want long day varieties. These need 14 to 16 hours of daylight to bloom properly. Varieties like Walla Walla, Copra, and Red Wing are what you want up there. I learned this the hard way. My first year gardening here in the valley, I bought onion sets from the hardware store without checking what kind they were. Turns out they were short-day varieties meant for Southern California. I planted them in February, and by the time our day length here in the valley was long enough for them, they'd already bolted. I got pencil-thin onions that were all tops, no bulbs. Total waste of time. So make sure you're buying the right day-length varieties for your part of California. Now, here in the Central Valley, I have found that I need to start my onion and shallot seeds right around Christmas time. That way, the plants are ready to go out into my garden as transplants, either the last week of February or the first week of March. That way, they will start developing nice big bulbs in May, when day length is at its maximum, and I can harvest them in June, which is right around the summer solstice. That's when I get the biggest bulb development, when they're ready for harvest, right around the year's maximum day length. Now, if you're in Southern California and you haven't started your onions yet, you're running out of time. You really needed to start them back in December or January. But don't panic, you can still buy onion starts from nurseries. Places like Armstrong Garden Centers usually have them in February. Just make sure you're getting short-day varieties. For those of you in Northern California, you actually have a little more time because your day length gets so much longer in summer. You can start onion seeds in late January or early February and still get good bulbing because you have those long 15 to 16-hour days in June and July. Now, growing garlic is similar to growing onions, but with one additional requirement. They also need lots of chill. So not only does your garlic bulb need to mature in late spring, early summer, when days are very long, but you also need to accumulate a lot of cool chill hours on the bulbs when you plant them in the soil. Now here's where California gets interesting with garlic. If you live in the Central Valley or anywhere inland, we actually don't get enough chill hours for hardneck garlic. Hardneck varieties need 8 to 10 weeks of temperatures below 45 degrees to form those nice big cloves. We just don't get that here. So here in the valley, I only grow softneck varieties like California Early and California Late. These need way less chill, just 4 to 6 weeks of cool weather, and they do fantastic here. I plant my garlic in November, So it sits in the soil throughout December, January, and February, and it accumulates those cool weather hours to support good bulb development. Then I'll be able to harvest them in late May, early June, and I'll get nice fat bulbs. But if you live on the coast, San Francisco, Half Moon Bay, anywhere where the marine layer keeps things cool all winter, you can actually grow hard-neck varieties. You coastal folks get enough chill hours for varieties like German Extra Hardy and Chestnut Red. So take advantage of that if you live near the ocean. Now, if you're in Southern California, down in San Diego, Palm Springs, and the desert areas, and you haven't planted your garlic yet, you are running out of time because the number of chill hours left in the season is getting really low. If you haven't planted your garlic yet, you'll have to grow soft-neck garlic, as it requires less chill than hard-neck garlic. Don't even bother with hard-neck garlic this late in the season because hard-neck varieties need way more chill than soft-neck varieties do. So when you plant garlic in California, basically, it has to be fine-tuned to your location. But no matter what, you need them in the ground when it's still cold out to accumulate that chill. And they need to mature in the late spring, early summer, when the days are still nice and long. Segment 8. Warm Season, Lettuce and Veggie number 32, that you should start in February is your warm season lettuces. And when I say that, I mostly mean your romaine types. Now, a common mistake that California gardeners make is thinking that all lettuce types are cold hardy, and that's just not the case. While the red leaf lettuce tends to be very cold hardy, your romaine types tend not to be. In fact, anything beyond a light frost can really damage romaine. I can't grow romaine out in my garden in our winters here in the Central Valley. It's just too cold. This is a variety of romaine called Little Gem that I have growing in this pot and will be ready for transplant very soon once the temperature starts moderating. Romaine types are actually much more heat tolerant than your leaf lettuce types. They don't bolt as easily. So while I need to harvest my leaf lettuce by April here in the valley, my romaine actually gets the nicest heads around May 1st to May 15th, believe it or not. And you can actually grow a lot of these heat-tolerant varieties of romaine all summer long here in California if you grow them underneath 40 to 50% shade cloth. Cold is more the enemy of your romaine types than heat is, especially when you use shade cloth to your advantage, or you plant them in partial shade or maybe even full shade in the dead of summer. Now, this is especially true for those of us in the hot inland valleys. Here in the Central Valley, I can grow romaine from March through October if I use shade cloth once we hit the 90 and 100-degree days. So, believe it or not, you actually need to look at your romaine types of lettuce as more of a summer crop than a winter crop. So that's why I had to break these up and give them their own little segment. For those of you on the coast, you have it even better. You can grow romaine year-round without shade cloth because your temperatures remain moderate. You coastal folks in Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, anywhere along Highway 1, you're living in romaine paradise. You can plant it now in February and harvest it in May, then plant again in July and harvest in September. You have continuous lettuce year-round. I love growing romaine lettuce. It's by far my favorite type of lettuce, and it's taken me a long time to figure out the eccentricities of these different types of lettuce here in California. And this variety, Little Gem, it's really one of the best, most heat-tolerant varieties I've found, and I highly recommend it. Jericho is another great one for us California gardeners dealing with heat. These varieties handle our California sun way better than the standard Paris Island or Cos types, which just bolt the second it hits 75 degrees. Conclusion. And that right there are 32 different veggies that you can plant out in your California garden in February. Now look, this isn't a list of every single thing you can plant in your garden in February. These are just the most common items you can quickly run into at an Armstrong Garden Center, Green Acres Nursery, or Lowe's, or easily find online, that we commonly eat here in California. There are tons of other things that are more obscure out there. I didn't even talk about artichokes, fava beans, or kohlrabi, so this is just a guide to get you started and motivated, because now is the time to plan for spring and summer. And even though it is still winter here in California, believe it or not, because there's so much hope on the horizon. I mean, we're just weeks away from those beautiful 70-degree spring days. This is one of my favorite times of the year for California gardening. We have this incredible window where it's cool enough to still grow the cold season crops, but warm enough to start planning for summer. It's really magical. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more California-specific videos like these. If you have any questions about the veggies that I mentioned in this video, ask them down in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them.